Welcome everybody to today's basic income space. Let's say, was that a sound effect?
No, but I'll
That
use it.
that
It's my
worked. That
door
worked
opening.
well, actually.
Wow.
It's like I didn't know that we had that kind of production values already.
I'll get to work on it.
All right, so yeah, this space is brought to you by Comingle, which is the platform being crowdfunded right now on Indiegogo to create a small basic income floor right now to make sure no member of the community goes without basic income for a week. And part of this show will the way this will go is we'll start off with just like a quick update about Comingle, and then we will move on to a little bit of news, and then we will get to our special guest, Leslie Kausch, who is a licensed clinical mental health counselor who specializes in trauma, PTSD, domestic abuse, and women's issues. And I'm really looking forward to diving into the impacts with her as in regards to basic income and mental health. So that'll be the first hour, and everyone is welcome to use the reply function to ask questions and interact in that way in that first hour. And then the second hour, we will uplift speakers to ask questions and comments specifically about either Comingle or mental health and discussion that we'd had in the first hour. So with all that said, let's get to just a little Comingle update. Do you want to get to that, Conrad or Josh?
I can take it this time. So for those who don't know, Comingle is essentially UBI in an app, doing it without waiting for the government. Everyone chips in a certain amount, and everyone gets back the exact same amount. Or everyone chips in a percentage, and everyone gets back the exact same amount. So it's a money pooling system such that nobody ever goes a week without income. And we are running a crowdfund right now with a week to go, where our target is $75,000. We're at 96% at $72,259 from 520 backers. We currently have a matching donor who, when we hit the next 1,000 mark, so when we get to 73,000, we'll throw in one more $1,000, essentially doubling the next so many donations that come in. And in anticipation of hitting our target and moving on beyond that, we'll be rewriting our messaging a bit on the page and what the objective is with the crowdfund, moving from fundraising to people raising. So part of this was to raise some money for the budget, and we want to raise as much as possible. But the other part of it, which is even more important, is raising a community and starting to get out in the public and building a base of people who can be the first members of Comingle and try it out. And having 1,000, 2,000 people say they want to sign on is invaluable for us as we go and raise further funds and demonstrate social proof that people actually want this to happen. So what we're going to be asking people to do all week is focus more on numbers of people. So a buck and a share is worth much more than $10 and nothing. So that's basically where we're at with that. And encourage you to look at the crowdfund page that Scott put in the main tweet under this, or follow any one of our profiles, and you'll find it within about half a second.
Josh, I also, let's just mention that there is the wall of founding members, and Josh actually just got that mock-up up that people can go to as well at comingle.us/founding-members. And I just shared a tweet about that recently, so people can actually go look at that too. But you want to just talk just a little bit about that too,
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, I'm working hard here trying to get everybody's name to look as fancy as it needs to, as a way of thanking everybody who's backing us. Just want to give you all a place to be glorified for eternity. But only if we hit our goal, because if we don't hit our goal, all the names will go away and disappear forever. But yeah, go take a look at it. I think if it's in there, maybe I'll try to post it in here if I can. It's
And
still
just
in the works though, so and just to keep in mind, you'll have a chance to tell us exactly how you want your name phrased, and all that is just all work in progress.
Or if you want it, you know.
Right?
So
Yeah.
another thing to point out with this crowdfund is we really are trying to do something different than the typical crowdfund where, like on Indiegogo, it's usually a product and you're buying a product, and the more money you put in, the fancier the thing you get. But in the spirit of Comingle, being everyone puts in what they can and what they can afford or what is their appropriate share, and everyone getting out the exact same amount as in sort of a UBI payment, the real perk or reward that comes out of this is that we all get Comingle and we can build it together. And anyone who donates through the campaign gets the equal perks, which is one is this having your name on the wall of founding members forever. Another is early access. So in the order in which people donate, we'll have the first crack at being on the platform when we open it. And lastly is an ongoing invite to not only these spaces, but other conversations we'll be having, seeking input as we build this thing. We want to build it with the community in mind, so we want to invite people in to kind of put us through our paces and make sure we're thinking of all the right stuff as we build.
Thanks, Conrad. And I'll just add quickly that I think the founding member wall looks beautiful. I think Josh did a great job as always. He's really good at design work and visualization. It really comes through.
Thanks. Yeah. Y'all deserve it.
So next up, I just want to cover a bit of important basic income news that's happened in the past week or so. And I think the pieces I want to uplift this time are that on Wednesday, a couple, I think, big, potentially big political things happened here in the U.S. of note. And one of those is that Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman reintroduced the Guaranteed Income Pilot Program Act into Congress. And the goal of that, what that would do is pass a federally funded national 3-year pilot program into guaranteed income. And there would be 20,000 participants. 10,000 people would receive monthly income. 10,000 people would be in the control group. And the amount provided, according to the bill, would be a fair market rent for the person's region that they're in for a 2-bedroom house. It's a interesting approach, and as we all know, it's not universal basic income, and but it's still it would of course mostly show the same as we've seen before, that the evidence is positive, and actually the report would be due 2 years afterwards. So if this pilot were to actually pass and launch in 2024, then the report would happen in 2029. And you can support or oppose it based on that information, but that's the news when it comes to some actual legislation in Congress related to a guaranteed income. And the next thing too I wanted to mention was there is actually a senator candidate in Maryland named Will Jawando added universal, he calls it universal guaranteed income in his platform, but he's stressing universality. And he is filling a seat that is being emptied. Ben Cardin is stepping down and will not be running for re-election. So this is an open seat for candidates in Maryland to run for. And since this is a historically Democratic-controlled state, then if he were to win the primary, then that would be a sitting senator in the U.S. Senate who ran on UBI in his platform and would want to propose basic income legislation. So I think that's definitely something of note as well. So with that said, excuse me. Next up, Leslie Couch. It's great to have you join us today. I really think it's an important discussion to be had and a really important justification for unconditional basic income when it comes to the impacts on mental health and just how poor mental health is, how difficult it is that people find to get by, how challenging it is to people's relationships, all the different impacts that this lack of economic security and the effects of poverty and the effects of high inequality are on our mental health. So yeah, please welcome, and please tell us just a bit more about yourself and even just some of your experiences on the ground and how you see this every day and why you strongly support basic income because of it.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here. It's so many moons ago when I was in graduate school studying to be a counselor. I found a blurb in the back, like literally the next to last page of a counseling journal. It was maybe a paragraph. And it was talking about a study. I'm in North Carolina. This was a study in Western North Carolina of adolescent mental health. And Western North Carolina is pretty poor. So this was a longitudinal study. And sometime in the middle of the study, the Cherokee Nation were allowed to have casinos. And fairly straight away, they set it up so every enrolled member would get a dividend. I mean, effectively a basic income every year. No questions asked, just cash. And so researchers got to watch in real time that adolescent symptoms of mental illness dropped off a cliff. Like they were cut in half almost immediately. And I'm looking at this paragraph and I'm like, why is this not the lead? Like didn't we just prove that poverty causes mental illness, what we call mental illness? And I got patted on the head and nobody thought much of it. So, I got involved with my studies and kind of dropped it. And then my son periodically will blow up my feeds with videos that he wants me to watch. And he kept sending me ones about basic income. And finally, to make him stop, I watched one. And I immediately drew the line from that thing I had seen that made so much sense. And also the work that I was doing. And that was it. Since then, anything I could figure out to further this, I'm all in. A lot of the work that I do is patching people together so they can do their lives as effectively as they can. But frankly, most people who come to therapists, they need cash. And if they have cash, they don't need therapy. Or therapy will not be as urgent. I think everybody could use therapy, but it will not be as urgent.
Yeah, I remember one of the pieces of evidence that I have in my mega thread of evidence on Twitter that's pinned is how there was actually a pilot that compared unconditional cash to a therapy that actually that cost more than the cash. And what they found was that the cash was more effective and that if you compared the cash to cash plus therapy, then even the combination wasn't more effective. And so I look at that and it's like, well, seriously, what are we doing here? When clearly what people need is both money and resources, and again, the sense of security that comes from it.
Absolutely. Excuse me. One of the things that we know about scarcity is that whatever you are scarce on, you literally can't think about other things. They did this study with conscientious objectors. They were like, okay, tell you what, we won't put you in jail if you agree to this study. Okay, I'm in. So for 3 months, they gave this group of men, I can't remember whether it was 1,000 or 1,200 calories a day. Not much.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things they found is that these men became obsessed with cooking. They looked at cooking magazines. They shared recipes with each other. They invented recipes. That's all they talked about. None of these people were chefs going in. So, but they were put in a position of scarcity, and that's all they could think about. But if you shift that to financial precarity, financial scarcity, it has an even bigger effect because it literally lowers our IQ. It lowers our measurable IQ. And all we can think about is money. And not in a strategic way, not in a, if I buy just one package of toilet paper, then I'll have money for this. We do things like, if I buy a Costco thing of toilet paper, then if I don't have money later, at least I'll have toilet paper.
Right.
We can't be strategic. We can't what is the next thing in my life I need to tackle? We can't think like that. All we can think about is, oh my gosh, how am I going to pay for rent? Oh my gosh, how am I going to feed my kids? And it compromises every other aspect of your life when people are financially precarious.
It's really,
and then we penalize them. Then when they make bad decisions, we're like, see, poor people are stupid. See, poor people don't make good decisions. And then it just snowballs on itself.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's the studies are really interesting that go into the impacts of scarcity on our mental bandwidth, let's say. And the multiple studies have looked at this, and they compare it to a loss of 13 to 14 IQ points, and that also being kind of equivalent to operating on 24 hours awake with no sleep, and also even being inebriated. So there's this really strong mental impact, and just imagine, it's hard to imagine just if you could actually effectively increase so many people's effective IQ, just how transformative that would be to our entire society. And also just consider if 30% of the country is effectively operating without any sleep, how much that would make a difference if suddenly everyone got a good night's sleep. Of course, it would be a massive difference.
And I think in that scenario, I think it would be much easier for us to muster the political will to say, oh my gosh, we have a crisis on our hands. We should organize to make sure that people are getting enough sleep so we're not a hazard to each other.
Yeah.
But because we slice and dice people and penalize people, blame people for being poor, so we try to segment out who are the deserving poor, as opposed to the people who have hard lives because they have been poor. Yeah, this is where universality has to be part of the package.
I mean, for me, it's just, if you just take a second to think about your own personal life when things are not going well, it's harder to keep emotional balance and centeredness. It's more than just functionality too. And I remember, for me, the direct opposite of that is a very stark thing I experienced trying to fundraise for several projects and being at some event with lots of very wealthy people. Giving speeches about how, what was it? Ray Dalio was like, I credit all of my success and all of my billions of dollars to my practice of meditation. And these people are all walking around super centered and everything. I'm like, son of a bitch, you've got a nanny, a maid, a personal chef, and all the time in the world to do whatever you want and all the money to make the choices that you want. Of course, you're functioning at the highest you've ever functioned, and maybe potentially you're misattributing some of that good feeling to the fact that all of the barriers have fallen away for you. I know when I don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, or I have money stress, I can't think as clearly, but I also can't react I can't be the person I want to be emotionally, or I can't show up in conversations leading with love, and I think that's where the whole hurt people comes from. It's a cyclical thing where your circumstances have a big effect. The cortisol and everything going on through your system has a big effect on you. And the way we treat it is not to say your circumstances are awful, let's deal with those circumstances. It's, you're depressed, let's give you some drugs, or you're anxious, but sometimes those are the right responses when you're at the edge of eviction, or you're watching your kids miss out on opportunities or go hungry. It's like, maybe it's not that you're a depressive person so much as your situation is depression inducing.
Right. It can't be a disorder if what you're having is a very appropriate response to a very hard situation. If a bear is chasing me and I'm scared, that is not evidence of an anxiety disorder.
Take some Xanax. I think you'll feel better about it.
Well, and what you're describing is the sort of internal, if you're financially precarious, it's hard for you to think, you're stressed out, you're not sleeping well, it's hard to be kind to people. But then on the other end of it, most of the systems that allegedly provide support for people are not designed to interact with people who don't act like middle-class white people. And so if you come in and you're stressed out and anxious and hard to be kind to people, you're going to be penalized and not given access to what we call a safety net, because then obviously you're not deserving poor.
Right.
Yeah, it's like the difference between welfare programs and tax credits for the middle class, where it's like the people who are the most stressed out and the most overburdened with everything that they're having to worry about in their daily lives, that's really taxing their ability to think. Those are the ones who we say, you've got to jump through this hoop. You have to sign a triplicate here. You have to travel here for this amount of time and send out this many applications and spend this many hours on the phone. Like, it's ridiculous, the number of hoops that we put forth for them. And then if you're in the middle class and you get to enjoy a tax credit, then it's just automatic and you don't have to do anything at all. Yeah. So we definitely treat these two groups very differently.
There's an absurdity to it as well. I remember we interviewed someone who was doing poverty and housing stuff in San Francisco, and talking about how, there was this great new idea being pushed. This was several years ago, and it's called housing first. And it's like, we decided, like, instead of saying, show that you're ready to be in housing by cleaning up and getting a job or whatever, we'll give them housing first, and then that just might help people clean up and get a job, like get in a situation where there's comfort and solid ground to stand on and a roof over your head. Maybe the lack of those things is really what's at issue. Like, everyone's ready to be indoors, and everyone's ready to to have, basic financial burden and existential crisis taken out of their life without having to, somehow prove deserving of it first.
Yeah, one of the things, so the first 3 years of my career, I worked at the battered women's shelter, and then I've worked in other capacities at the court system and police department and stuff. But, I would literally have to say to people, I am so sorry for what I'm about to explain to you, but here are the sort of etiquette behavior things. Basically, if you can channel me as a white middle-class woman, if you can go in and act like you think I might act, say the things you think I might say, even though it is stupid that this should be a criteria, the next person you run into at that office chances are they will be less mean to you. And chances are you will more easily access something. But that's insanity, because by and large, people like me don't need those things. And then some of them, like you had to go there and fill out a paper thing. But then other pieces of it, in order to access that, you would have to have a phone with internet. And never mind, you also had to have a way to get there. But we only were able to give 4 bus passes per family. So once they've accessed one piece of the alleged safety net, I'm out of resources to help them access any other pieces. It's insanity.
Yeah, like you should be able to prescribe basic income.
Yes.
Well,
Sign me up.
That's a great. We interviewed, I think it was Sheila Reguer. You know her, right, Scott?
Yeah.
In Canada, and she was talking about how she does a lot of research up there and advocacy, and they had, I guess, polled a bunch of doctors, and by and large, doctors in Canada, greatly appreciate working in a universal healthcare system compared to, what they see going on down here, but a very common response is, we still wish we could just prescribe cash. Like, cash is the best preventative medicine. That's what keeps people from coming in an emergency. That's what allows people to take better care of themselves. With mental health being more and more accepted as, a very central pillar of, general health, it's very similar. Why are we treating people on the back end with drugs and counseling in the middle of a crisis, rather than doing as much preventatively as possible to help people not get in these crisis situations?
Yeah, I feel that doctors in Canada seem to understand this better, possibly because of the universal healthcare system that they have. But I think it's very interesting, and people should know that the Canadian Medical Association has endorsed basic income, and so has the Canadian Mental Health Association. Both have endorsed basic income. So I would love to see the same kind of associations here in the U.S. do the same thing, and I wonder when they will. When we'll see that.
Yeah, it's been astonishing to me as I've sort of researched the physical and mental health impacts of a basic income. Because even in studies where that's not what they're studying, especially early on, they were studying labor force participation. Did people still work? Because, we don't want to pay people to not work. But even when they weren't studying it, people would volunteer. I feel healthier. I am less, they would volunteer these things. And when they're actually studying it, that's always one of the results. I remember one of my favorite studies. It was a small scale study in London. It was with rough sleepers, which is homeless addicts, really. And so they had tried all sorts of things that had zero effect. And they were like, well, what the heck? Let's just give them the money. What the heck? So they gave them money once a month. I think it was effectively $700 for a year. It's only 13 men, so it was a small study. But all of them used less. Most of them had stable housing. Some of them took classes. Almost all of them reconnected with family members. Like, everything that the NGOs had been unable to do happened when they just gave them cash and stayed out of it. And so, of
Yeah.
course, they stopped it after a year and went back to however they were doing things before. But speaking of Canada, the work of Evelyn Forget, one of the things that was fascinating to me about the retrospective research she did about the Mincome project was that it improved the health of the whole community, even people who didn't receive the money. It improved the mental, like there was less people accessed the health and mental health systems in general in the whole community just by giving folks who needed it most. Now, having it universal saves a lot of bean counters and a lot of BS administration. But it was fascinating to me what a big difference it made to the entire community.
Yeah, the saturation site stuff is just really where just really fascinating stuff comes through when an entire community actually has a monthly basic income floor. I'd add that so for those listeners who don't know, then the Dolphin pilot took place in the latter half of the 1970s in Manitoba. And there was a saturation site in Dauphin, Canada. And as a result of that, there were 8.5% fewer hospitalizations, and the thinking for that is actually due to less stress, leading to like fewer work injuries on the job. That was their hypothesis for where that came from. And I'd also add too, we always keep finding new studies come out looking at the same data, and some newer studies looking at that data have found that there was a 15% drop in overall crime and a 37% drop in violent crime. And the violent crime was actually thought to be mostly less domestic abuse. And this is why I think it's like I've seen some really strange takes from the left recently, I feel, that have surprised me, which is this kind of pushback against how basic income would reduce crime. And I don't know why that is. I think maybe it's because that they fear that you don't want to like victim blame and say that people in poverty are the ones committing crime. And okay, it's just because you're in poverty, it definitely does not mean that you're going to commit crimes. But of course, also in reality, if people are in poverty and they have unmet needs, there's going to be more crime based on those lack of survival needs. And besides the lack of resources, again, there's an importance of this feeling of security. So you can not be in poverty, but be very stressed out, and that can lead to worse mental health, which can also lead to more crime.
So also some of what I've read about where some of the crime related to poverty comes from is two places. One is like, we don't have anything to eat. So I get that it's illegal, but I'm absolutely stealing something or doing whatever I have to do to lay my hands on money.
Right.
Or, okay, nobody cares. They're throwing me off the cliff anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Why not knock over this store and steal whatever the heck just because I feel like it? If I'm already being thrown away, in for a penny, in for a pound. And both of those things are alleviated.
Yeah, my example of that one is sort of a personal one where, I've always been like very sensitive to the idea of littering and stuff. And it feels like it's kind of a small example, but it's poignant to me. I remember I moved to New York City and I'd see people, there's a trash can on every single corner, but there's still people littering everywhere. And like you see somebody just throw trash on the ground like 2 feet away from a trash can, and my blood would boil and I'd want to say something. And then one day it sort of hit me when I was doing this work. It's like, that's what happens. That total lack of respect for or care for, sense of obligation for your community and that surrounding you is a reciprocating act when that community and those around you treat you the same way. When you're thrown away, then you don't exert that care back to your community, and and it made me want to, instead of chewing out the person, or basically just let the person know in some way, shape, or form that you matter to this community, to me. The things you do matter. And just in kind of looking around in these, I've lived in a lot of rougher neighborhoods in the city since I've been here. And one thing you find is that there's one place that never ever gets vandalized, that I get, and it's the church, because that's where people get their sense of community. For a lot of people, I remember I accidentally parked in front of a church once, and when I drove away, there were nails in my tires for having the audacity to do that. But it's like, this is where a sense of loyalty and community obligation and trust comes from, is when some group or authority or entity or your community at large says, hey, we care about you. All of a sudden you care right back, and it has to be reciprocal, and society has to make that first step, has to make that good faith step. And I can't think of a better way to do that and say, we are going to trust you enough from day one to make sure that you can get by. We're not going to let you fall behind, period.
That's one of the things that's been really interesting to me about some of the projects, where actually the amount of money they're able to give people is not big. $200 makes a difference, but that's not paying rent. But you're communicating, it matters to us that you're okay. And this is what we can figure out right now, but we care about you. You're on our radar. We want to help. And I think we can't really quantify the amount that communication has on how people feel.
Yeah, that's a really important thing to point out, especially in the context of Comingle, when we're looking to do just $50 per week as a basic income floor. And people can get hung up on that number and think, well, that's not that much. Again, like you said, it's not going to pay rent. It'll help with food, and but so much, like, there's more to it than that. It really is this. It's this community feeling of being part of a community, and the community says, we will not let you fall below this amount of money each week. Like, we care about you enough that we are all willing to come together and make sure that this happens. And that feeling of trust and that feeling of community, I think, I don't know how you can put a price on that, and what amount of even mental health improvement, even just that will have, of just feeling that people care about you.
Right.
Yeah, I think a big part that's missed too is we focus, and we've done this on this call a lot so far too, is because what everyone's so focused on is how bad things are for so many people, and how all the negative impacts of mental health that we need to make sure people aren't experiencing. And a lot of times we forget to talk about the positive, because that's less quantifiable, because it's the hypothetical that we don't have, the opportunity cost of not doing this. And from every, in all these pilots that we've done, including the one we ran, one for a docuseries we worked on, it's not just that escapist and self-destructive and addictive behaviors decrease, stress decreases, domestic violence decreases. These are all things we can say, wow, those are big problems in our society, that it's great to see them go down. The household struggle, all those sorts of things. But then there's, on the other side, what you see when you look even closer is confidence and self-esteem shoot way up when people feel like they can, make choices with agency in their lives. And healthy behaviors increase, and people take more interest in, not just because of their bandwidth, but the extra bandwidth, but because of, partially with the self-confidence and the agency and the ability to spend a little more on things they care about, get gym memberships, eat healthier, take more time for self-care. And then the feelings of trust and community obligation, these are all things that, you can't really measure the lack of it, but when they're amplified and when you see them in practice, I think that's where the actual windfall really happens. It's not just mitigating some of the terrible shit we have going on, to be honest. It's allowing for the potential in people. And so it's not just, a basic income is not just saying to people, we care about you enough to not let you fail. It's that we believe in you enough to want to see what you can do.
Yeah, that's great. And I also, it's great that you also bring up the positive, because there's also some positive psychology findings too, that it's not only about the recipient and the positives there, but it's also about the giver and the positives there. So, and I just want to, like, positive psychology is fascinating as to like how people can actually be like happier instead of actually, addressing like depression and anxiety. And one of those things that actually makes people happier is just like the simplest things you can do is just to help other people. And I think that that's also another side of Comingle, where like that's a great reason to be a net contributor, where you're actually putting in more than you're getting back because you know that you're helping people. And I think that too is going to be great for mental health in a positive way.
The other thing, if we expand past the individual, one of the things that was fascinating to me about the Mincome experiment is that once people had their nose above water and knew that they could make it at a basic level, their minds immediately started to turn to, oh, wow, this part of my neighborhood looks like crap. Maybe we should get together and paint it, or make a garden, or wow, these people on city council, our city leaders are kind of dumb. Like, where else can we find somebody smarter? Or where they start figuring out how to make their community and their region and the world better when they're not hanging on the edge of a cliff. This is where people's minds naturally go. So it amplifies all of that.
Yeah, and I think another thing too, now that we're going beyond the individual to the community, and I also think it's really interesting, and this goes back to the Great Smoky Mountain Study of Youth that you mentioned earlier, with the tribe of East Cherokee and what was effectively a basic income for all tribe members. That still exists to this day, by the way, for people who don't know about this. This started in the mid 90s and is still going on. And at this point, it's around $12,000 per year. So it's actually, what people would consider to be a basic income. And not only did you see these immediate impacts, as Leslie mentioned earlier, but these impacts have stuck around for the kids. So if you were a kid who was raised in this environment, and now all these these decades later, this study just came out in 2022, and they looked at these kids who are now adults in their late 20s, 30s, and here's a segment from one of the study, that the group that received the cash payments had 1/3 of the anxiety symptoms and about half the depression and cannabis use symptoms compared to the group that did not receive the payments. So this is decades later, where the kids have grown up to have less anxiety and less depression. And that's just, I think that's amazing.
I think too, parenting is super important. One of the questions we asked in one of the later interviews with our participants was, after we've talked about all the personal stuff and what would it mean in your life, and then what would it have meant in your life, eventually you go back far enough, it's like, what if this had been something around for your parents when you were a kid? We model our, not only is there like less struggling or whatever, but we model how we show up in the world and who we are and how we parent our own kids after the upbringing we were in. So if you're in a house with a lot of stress or money problems, and honestly, that's at the root of a lot of it, of a lot of domestic problems, it fundamentally changes who you are the rest of your life. So there's the immediate effects of a basic income showing up in an area, but then the multi-generational effects, the second order effects. I'm very curious to find out like what we would actually learn if we had a couple of generations that don't remember at any point anyone in their family being like, I don't know what I'm going to do, how we're going to feed ourselves this week,
Yeah,
And
exactly.
how do you quantify what we have saved, if you want to do it strictly from a cash thing, how much money what we call the safety net is saved, or how much less crime, or how much less substance abuse, if by giving those kids when they were small their families a basic income. Like, it's impossible for us to be, it's sort of to your point earlier, we can't quantify the absence of something, but we know that it made a huge difference, and there had to be countless knock-on effects from that. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, you were talking about violence in the family.
Mhm.
It's true that having a basic income lowers the likelihood that someone will be violent, which I'm all about and would be fantastic. But from the other end of it, as a therapist and a victim advocate, I feel so hamstrung often because someone will come in and they'll say, "Oh, I want to work on my anxiety." Well, in short order, I figure out this is not a disorder. You're terrified at home because it's a terrifying situation at home.
Mhm.
But if you don't have, this is a very common tactic of people who control their partners. They control access to money. They give them almost, but not quite enough money for groceries, school, whatever. They make sure the car is not in the targeted partner's name, or even if it can be managed, it's in somebody in the violent partner's family. So they don't even, quote, own a car. She has no access to information about money. Any statements about assets or bank accounts are password protected that the targeted partner can't access. So to have to say to somebody, I get that you're terrified. I get that you're scared for your kids. I get that this stresses you out. I get that this is hard for you to think. And you should assume that it will be a minimum of a year before the scary partner you live with will have to help support you. So you have to be able to have access to income to support you and your kids for a year if you want to try to leave. That, like, I cannot tell you what that does to me, but that's a fraction of what it does to my clients. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I don't tell them what to do, but I also try to, if you're going to try to leave, let's plan so that this goes as well as possible. But in many, many cases, that's not possible. And I
Yeah.
find that incredibly frustrating. And this is one of my big hopes for a basic income.
Well, this is something I think it makes it very important to get the devil in the details right, because currently with the guaranteed income pilots going on around the country, I've raised this point many times in those circles, there's a common trend of, $500 a month. It's the
Lost you.
Uh-oh. He's still connected.
Yeah. Leslie, we've only got you for a few more minutes, at least until, and you can stay longer if you want. But I think what you mentioned just now kind of gave me a thought that, like, that the money is being used as a means of control in an abusive relationship.
Absolutely.
But if you expand that into how society kind of works, like, I don't want to characterize, us as victims, but it's sort of what we're up against. We've got this absurd situation where it's very clear that an additional amount of money for basically an allowance for the people in the world is going to empower them, and we've got tons of data saying yes, it will. There's so much saying how healthy it would be, how great it would be. It doesn't seem to be getting through. What is this resistance to is there some need that people feel to have this kind of abusive dynamic as the status quo? Are we just so used to having that? You get what I'm saying?
Said it. Yeah. Yes, it's a mechanism of control. I mean, the real estate guy who was just at a conference saying how we need to have unemployment of 40 or 50% because we need to reset the balance of power. Workers think they have power and we need to bury them so they remember they don't. In some ways, you're right. We do this large scale. We are increasingly pricing people out of the ability just to have the basics, just literally to live. We're pricing them out. And then we get to be mean to them because now they're homeless or now they're using drugs. Yeah, it's a very similar mechanism.
Yeah, so it just, I mean, what we're doing is we've got this challenge at Comingle of like, how do we kind of get this message out that things don't have to be this way, right? That's the big thing that we're trying to propose, is that there are plenty of ways that we could be escaping from this dynamic of money being the main means of control, and that we could, by sharing it, we start to, break away at that system. And so, I don't know, I just keep running into this idea that it's just something we kind of need. Like there's sort of an inner desire to have this kind of abusive nature of the way society is set up. Like it's always been this way in terms of how the power structure of the world works. Like, is there something just human that requires this? I mean, I don't know if you have the answer, but you might have a couple insights from the way you're able to, be exposed to how people think, I guess.
So one thought that I have about it, and, I'm a counselor. I think we tend to be fairly optimistic and tend to lean towards seeing people's assets and the ways and people's caring for each other. But I think when we set up a system, well, I was talking to some friends about sort of the messages of being middle class. There's the carrot, if you work, if you go to college, if you get this white collar job, etc., then you can become wealthy. You can hang with these wealthy people that you admire. But if you look crosswise at somebody, or if you don't toe the line, we will kick you out of the middle class as hard as we can go, and you will never recover. And middle class people are seeing this. Like so many people are dropping out of the back of the middle class. It's unreal. So then when you set up that system, it doesn't matter if I have $1 billion. I don't feel like I have enough money. So I need to get more. If I have $1 million, I don't feel like I have enough money. So we set up this thing where people are hoarding because they feel like they're on the edge. And they can't tell the difference between being actually on the edge and feeling scared because of an old story.
Yeah, I did that. I did a chart on a video that just kind of showed, like, even in the billionaire class, you still see the same income inequality curve. Like, and I'm just wondering, like, is it because people, even as like a poor billionaire, like, are you still comparing yourself, trying to get into the big billionaire club, And so is it just like something that's happening at every level?
Yeah, if you hang your sense of well-being, your sense of goodness on being the best, and that's your thing, you're never going to get there. There's always either going to be somebody further up the ladder than you, or coming right up on your heels. So that sort of keeps people driven. But also, I had somebody tell me recently that they were raised working class, and I think they may have even said poor, but dad was an architect and mom was whatever staff at a school. And I'm like, dude, actually, y'all may have had feelings about money, but y'all were not poor. And it gets hard for us to tell the difference because we put such high stakes. If we kick you out the back, you will not be able to afford housing. You may, so it adds pressure to people to stay grinding, as we would say.
Yeah.
Right. We're at the 2:00 time time. So we are going to continue, and we're going to invite listeners to be a part of this, ask questions, and comment specifically about Comingle and about basic income and mental health, please. And
yeah, we can't turn it into a therapy session as much as we probably all need it. Yeah,
yeah, please don't ask Leslie for a free therapy session. And Leslie, you are going to stick with us for this second hour, right?
Yeah, I would love to.
That would be great. Thanks. All right. So I guess
what's the hourly price on this? Tell us when our time is up.
And boy, how am I going to write the notes for this session?
Hey, everybody, I'm just checking
right.
back in. Can you hear me this time?
Yeah, you're back, Conrad.
Oh, good.
Good to have you back.
Thank you.
Eddie, you are our first speaker. What would you like to? Yeah, first patient. Eddie, do you have any questions for Leslie?
Oh, I actually just tuned in a bit ago, and I just heard Comingle co-host say something, and I just wanted to comment about it.
This is Josh, by the way.
Hey Josh. Yeah, Josh was saying, like, making sort of the philosophical question, like, is there something about human society that makes it this way? And I did want to put forth the suggestion that I think that it's a dynamic that has to do with automation and productivity growth, and it's a little bit different. There's sort of like a common narrative that automation causes mass unemployment at some point in the future, and I've studied that question, and I think that what happens is that it doesn't cause mass unemployment. Actually, what happens is that because of demand going down because of automation, for demand for labor, the wages actually adjust downwards, and so you end up in the situation where everyone's struggling. And the last time it happened was during the Great Depression, and it is absolutely sort of a situation that could be changed. It doesn't have to be this way, but it's something that happens. When people's labor is in the market. It's being demanded by businesses, but when you make it less and less demanded because there's more productivity growth, there's more automation, then that tips the scales away from the direction of the worker of the worker consumer, and they have they just end up struggling. I just wanted to make that suggestion.
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah. Along those lines too, like Josh actually has this great video that I recommend people watch. You can find it on the YouTube Comingle channel, which is also just pointing out that there is just a natural result of market transactions on just a random basis that leads to an inequality curve. And so, like, as long as we have a market where people are exchanging, then we actually need a mechanism to make sure that we get money back at the bottom and away from the top, because otherwise it just grows, more and more extreme. And of course, automation is just an accelerant for that as well. If capital replaces labor, but there is definitely this kind of natural inclination for this extreme inequality.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that if you look at inequality historically, it had a peak back in the Great Depressions. From the Great Depression to 1980, inequality actually went downwards. And then from 1980 to now, it actually came back up. And so that's a very interesting dynamic that I think can actually be explained, and it has a great deal to do with what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excuse me. While we're talking about inequality, Leslie, just even want to mention anything too about because we've talked really about insecurity and poverty resulting in mental health issues, but I know inequality is part of this equation too. Did you just want to say something about that?
Well, so it's a little hard for me to separate some of what I'm seeing from COVID, But certainly from the beginning of COVID, things that were already in place, Eddie, sort of, you mentioned since the 80s, has accelerated to an astonishing extent. And it means that many people are aware how much closer they're living to the cliff than they used to. Here in North Carolina this year, rents went up 45%. 45% rents went up. And of course, housing prices skyrocketed like everywhere else in the country. And people are shocked that opioid overdoses have also spiked to an alarming extent. Nobody's drawing that line. So the more people see this sort of all the wealth in the country receding in the distance past, it's terrifying. But also people are much clearer that it doesn't matter whether they went to school. It doesn't matter what job they get. They're screwed, and they will be kicked. Many of them will be kicked out of the back of the system, and nobody cares.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. The way that the pandemic has kind of just revealed all of these, just how close we all were to begin with. It's like it was a pretty, I think in a way, maybe a good wake up call. I don't know.
Certainly, a lot more people experienced poverty for the first time. Like there's part of the problem that we have is this wide belief in the just world hypothesis, which is this belief that people deserve their poverty for poor decisions. And if you're not in poverty, you're not in poverty because you're making good decisions. And so the pandemic happens, and suddenly over 20 million jobs get wiped out in a very short matter of time. And then all these people who believed that this would never happen to them because they made good decisions suddenly going to interact with the safety net built around treating people that they made poor decisions. And I think that it, at least I think helps some people who experienced the unemployment insurance system, who experienced the need to go to food banks for the first time. Like, I think that was an important wake-up call for those who traditionally have believed that this would never happen to them.
I don't know. I think they should have thought of that before they lived during a pandemic.
Obviously short-sighted. Well, the other thing that many people who hadn't had to understand this before the pandemic realized is that what we call a social safety net was actually built mostly to be exceedingly and mostly ineffective. So I remember a friend who she's in her 40s, she's single and had a good job. And of course, the pandemic, all hell broke loose. She was out of work. And so she finally she kept trying to access the unemployment system, which you could only by phone because that makes sense. So she just started keeping a tick point, had a little piece of scratch paper, and she would just make a little mark every time she called and got a busy signal or almost got to speak to somebody and got dropped. And she finally quit counting after she had called literally 1,000 times over 5 weeks. Like, that is insanity to have to do something 1,000 times to get enough money for you to stay in your apartment and be able to eat. She had no idea because she had never had to try to access this system such as it is.
I was in that boat. It was a very, very hard time. Like, and a lot of people were incredibly distraught by the process of trying to get through. And to me, that it's not just like the inhumanity of having to do that sort of thing at all. It's a huge reminder of just how not set up to be efficient our sort of bureaucratic systems are. Like, if we had even a small basic income infrastructure in place, everyone had a bank account and decided to give people support, we could have had it to everyone the next day without a massive breakdown and without people sitting on the phone all day long for weeks at a time.
This is one of those circumstances where it just made it clear that if you have enough money, you can use money to save time. If you're poor, you have to use time, an excessive amount of time, to get even a small amount of money.
That's a really
What's the
good.
implication of that? Like, when you boil down, especially in a society where we measure out people's value by the hour, uh, I've just spent most of my life being self-employed or poor or struggling artist, and it's essentially anytime you want to do anything that, toward fixing up your house or doing something for your career or whatever, like an infinite amount of time is justifiable because your hours are useless, and the subtext of that is that you're worthless.
Exactly.
You're not worthless, Conrad. Don't worry.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, it's also I want to point out to people too who I think a lot of people don't even know this or they just learned it during the pandemic, but we essentially have over 50 different unemployment programs across the country where every state got to do this in their own way. And in some states, you were lucky to be in that state and have a functioning system that made it easier to get that pandemic assistance. And if you were not as lucky and happened to live in a place like Florida, then it was extremely difficult to get that. And you were one of those people who had to call 1,000 times or had to call every day for weeks, or who qualified and then didn't actually get their first payment for like months, and all these different horror stories that came out of this because there just isn't like one universal system for everybody that's at least there at all times for everybody.
And even that, like, so you might not get your check right away. Well, what if actually you lose the housing? How do you have an address where you're sure that that support can show up? By the time it shows up, are you still there? And if not, can you access it? The whole thing was just a hot mess.
Yeah. Patricia, you are up next. Do you have a question for Leslie or a comment about basic income and mental health?
I absolutely do. I was so excited about this episode.
Great.
I really was. I got right in here right away. It's been wonderful listening to you speak, Leslie. It really has been. Thank you. It is really interesting listening to the dynamics between the U.S. and Canada. Scott, you made an interesting comment about like observing the Canadian healthcare system. It's true in Canada, for the most part, we don't pay for Canadian health services. However, I have two comments about this. We don't have access to free mental health here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the first thing. The second thing is that I work within the disability community as an advocate. And one of the things that we have access to here is medical assistance in dying.
Mm.
And I know that's made news globally. And it started off in 2016 as what was called Track 1. And Track 1 stipulated that it was for imminent death only. It was expanded to Track 2 in, I believe it was 2020, where it was not just imminent death, but foreseeable death and extreme pain. And that encompassed a lot of the disability community. And people who were sort of able to encompass this extreme pain were predominantly those who suffered within the disability community, those who, and it was tolerable, where if you had something like multiple chemical sensitivity, or like you were like seated in a position where you were impoverished and were unable to afford your housing and were sitting in it started to get pretty extreme, and this has become a real thing. And it is now going to be expanded in March into mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is something that we are all terrified for. Now, just addressing the concept of housing, we are suffering from something called maid coercion. And it's it happens more often than not, where you might call something like an affordable housing um, service, where you're like, well, okay, I'm looking for some place to live because the price of housing here is unrealistic. It's just absurd. And so you'll call and you'll ask to see if you can get help finding affordable housing. And the operator on the other end will be like, oh, well, if you can't find affordable housing, there is always the option of maid. And, that is pretty triggering. And so there was this one time we were in a space and we were hosting it, and a person came in, and she was a doctor who administered maid. And she was really and truly under the impression that she was doing, a good thing for people. She was helping them out of painful situations. And this is how doctors here feel, those who do administer maid. And, for the most part, this is true. I should stipulate that for the most part, people who take maid are fundamentally people who really need it, and people who, because it was pushed for by patients. You should know that people who pushed for maid were patients who wanted maid. And so, but there is a class of people here, and this is a classist issue. And so there was a class of people here, and they were in my general airspace, and we were interviewing her, and they said, do you know that this is a little bit like euthanasia? And she said, this is a triggering word for me. And we were like, well, this is a triggering situation for us. And it's because poverty is real for people who are disabled. When you are disabled and when you are living in extreme poverty, and we have been banging the drum for basic income for, whatever, it's been like this, like hitting our head against the wall. Now, back in 2022, something called BC 22 was up on the docket in the House of Commons, where it was being discussed, and it's finally become law. And it was called the Canada Disability Act, and it's supposed to act a tiny little bit like a supplement for like a guarantee for people who are disabled, and it tops up essentially other targeted measures for those who are disabled throughout the country, and it is supposed to help with alleviate poverty for disabled folk. But the fact is that it's an empty bill, and it doesn't really do much. Like, everybody here is nervous about it, and they have this 18-month gap where it's going through regulatory process, and it's this window. And so we have been kind of like pushing for something called DIRB, which is a disability emergency relief benefit. It's not a thing which really exists, but we're all just kind of clamoring for it because that's what we want. And that makes sense. And the reason for that is because before we ever get money, they are going to, this is something that will happen. They're going to allow for MAID to be expanded for those who suffer from mental health.
Yeah, when I first heard about the MAID stuff in Canada, like, I was just shocked to see that, if even one person chooses to end their own life over choosing life, purely because of lack of access to resources, lack of economic security, lack of money, then society has completely failed them. And as you said, it's very important for someone to be able to actually make that choice. Like, you definitely don't want to prevent people from doing that, but at the same time, you have to make sure that people aren't doing that without some other option that they would choose if they actually had a basic income. Like, we do not want people committing suicide because of lack of basic income.
Exactly. And
That's
especially
the ultimate. It's the ultimate of medicating a problem rather than mitigating the causes of the problem, right? And so here's some antidepressants because your life is terrible. It's like, here's the medical solution, kill yourself. It's so dark. It's like it's something out of a Terry Gilliam movie or something.
Yeah. And so, like, one of the things that when I was first studying basic income, I started in a number of places, and one of the things I read was an article by a woman named Megan Bell in the Walrus, and she noted that she noticed research has shown that affluent children and teenagers are at high risk for anxiety, depression, and substance abuse. Researchers suggest that this is a result of isolation from parents and pressure to achieve. The rich have been shown to be more narcissistic and less empathetic, and narcissistic or toxic parenting can both cause narcissism in children and lead to significant emotional and physical health struggles for them. And so she suggests that those who are, wealthy and affluent also suffer from severe mental health problems when they are not taxed properly. The article she wrote was about having additional taxes for those who are wealthy. And I was wondering, Leslie, what your thoughts are on that kind of thing. If we were to have wealth taxes, which created distribution and, and enriched society on, who suffer from a smaller scale income, what your thoughts were, if that would be something, create balance, essentially.
So one of the thoughts that I have about that is that on a smaller scale, when we mistreat other people, even if it feels like we're getting our power back, right? If I, pick on my 8-year-old sister and my 8-year-old sister goes and pinches our 4-year-old brother and our 4-year-old brother goes and kicks the dog, like this is, we're passing the mistreatment down the line, and it feels somewhat more powerful to be able to be on the one who's hurting side of the equation, but there's still a cost there. Most of us don't like to think of ourselves as somebody who hurts other people or who makes it less likely that other people will be okay. And so there's no way there's not a cost. There's no way people are entirely oblivious to what them being a billionaire or whatever does to the rest of us. Now, they can't cop to it because then they can't actually face that cognitive dissonance, but there's no way there's not a cost there. So I agree with you, even though I think they would absolutely try to prevent any equalization or spreading the wealth around. There's no way that doesn't have a positive impact, in the same way that the way corporations used to operate, it mattered to corporations that they were taking care of their employees, that they were paying their employees enough to earn a living. And those companies and executives were pleased with themselves, that their employees were doing well. And then we've completely shifted the balance pretty much after the mid-70s.
As long as we're talking too about choosing death over life, I want to get to what I mentioned at the very beginning of this was about that tweet that was shared heavily recently, suggesting that basic income would lead to a big increase in suicides. And I'm not going to share what they said, other than that's the general gist. But I do want to remind everyone listening that I actually included in the reply to this space where the information is about this space, that I included a thread that I had I collated a bunch of evidence that we know about the results, mental health results from basic income. And some of it we've already discussed in our time so far, and some of it we haven't. But I wanted to suggest that people go through that thread, and also I want to highlight that one of the things that I think is a really strong piece of evidence is actually from Brazil, which is their Brasilia Familia program. And this was a long-term programs. So this is a 12-year study of 100 million recipients of monthly cash transfers. And this huge study of this huge cohort found a 61% lower risk of being a suicide victim than non-beneficiaries. So just to claim that basic income will increase suicides is not only completely wrong, but it's also completely unfounded based on very strong studies that we have about this even particular question.
And this has been true on smaller scale pilot projects as well. And the other piece that I'll mention, it's sort of suicide adjacent, if that's a thing, is that other deaths of despair, like drug overdoses or accidents sort of that come out of reckless behavior, those also decrease when people are no longer financially precarious. They are able to pay more attention. Being, doing dangerous activities is less interesting. Using drugs and alcohol, especially to an extreme extent, is less interesting if you're not living on the edge of a cliff.
Yeah, that to me, I think that's huge. We had, several stories from the pilot we ran and experienced, like people who came out of a very depressive place, people who just came out of very poor health, people who, in the look back interviews, thought they might not be alive now if they hadn't had a certain level of support during those times. And this always kind of brings me back to one of the most profound sort of summarizing ideas that I've come out of a lot of this work with, and regarding human nature. Like we can point to data that says, people don't do as many drugs, they don't do as many vices, they don't do as much crime, whatever. It always sort of begs the question a little bit, though, because it's counterintuitive to so many people, is why? Why do people, take more of an interest in their life and get more passionately engaged? And it might seem obvious, but it's not obvious to everyone, obviously. So I think what I came to, it has to do with the talk we're having today, has to do with behavioral psychology. And I've mentioned this, I think, in a previous space too, but I think it's worth bringing up again. I was reading this book by David Graeber called Bullshit Jobs. And there's a part where he's talking about infant development, and apparently in every one of our lives, in every person's life, there's a moment when you're a very small baby and sort of unaware of what's going on around you or how anything works, and you flail your arm around and knock something on the table and knock it over or make it move. And on one occasion, it dawns on you that you did that. You had that impact on something else in the world. And then you move your arm again and move it again and realize, yes, I did that. And for every single person, according to the study that Graeber wrote about, it's just a moment of elation. It's a moment of realization of being a cause, the ability to be a cause. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, and I kind of came away from that with I think that really is the deepest thing in human nature. That is the one thing that combines us all, is that we want to know that we can be a cause, that we can impact the world around us for the better, for others, for agency in our own lives, to feel like we have purpose. And if you come at trying to understand anyone and any behavior from that angle, from the idea that they simply want to matter, then both productive and positive and beneficial behaviors, as well as self-destructive and apathetic and addictive behaviors, can all be explained by this person is able to pursue the things that make them feel like they matter, versus this person's avenue of trying to feel like they matter have been squashed. So prescriptions from society, if you should just get a job and be a cog at this place or do your role or whatever, if it's or if people don't have an avenue to do what they think they're here on this earth to do in this very short time we have here, it's completely contrary to our entire psychology. How are we supposed to function if we don't know why we're here? And I think the most profound thing that UBI does is it's simply power. You can do whatever you want with it, and what everyone tends to do is pursue what's going to make them matter.
I think one place that I've seen sort of this in action is over the years I've had friends, but also clients who've come to me with very serious, often terminal diagnoses, and the ones who have some space in their lives because they have connections, because they're financially secure, they almost universally turn their minds to who do I want to connect with? What caring do I want to leave when I go? The ones who are financially precarious and disconnected. I had one friend who was already struggling with some really hard family relationships and financially on the edge, and got a terminal diagnosis that actually was going to be really quick. He literally just spent the rest of his money on as much cocaine as he could buy, and he just stayed high until his body gave out. And that it was just literally all he could figure out, given the bleakness of what was before him. And the other sort of deaths of despair seems to turn around. They can't contribute to their family. They can't even keep a roof over their head. So what is the point? Who cares if they go off and are high as a kite for weeks on end, or puking on the side of the street? Is that actually any different than them not being able to do their only purpose in a family, from a limited point of view? And once the financial precarity is gone, that sort of reckless behavior and extreme drug and alcohol use and whatever seems to dissipate as they realize there's countless other ways they matter to people.
I think
then the money isn't the main thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah.
I was just going to put in a quip. If you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, you don't walk.
Yep.
That's all of that is such a profound understanding. I think that we all want to matter, and the lack of basic income really actually hinders our ability to matter to those around us, which is where we get so much personal meaning from. John, do you have a question for Leslie or something about basic income and mental health?
Yes, I have a question about universal basic income in relation to rent and rent increases.
Okay.
And
that's not really, we really want to keep this focused on mental health right now. Do you have anything about mental health focused instead, or something?
Specifically, no. I mean, I was also going to just comment and respond in agreement to what Patricia was talking about with the maid.
Okay.
But I think that some of that is related to like disability and rent, and so I don't know if I should try to rephrase. I can think of another question and come back.
Okay, yeah. In the meantime, Alex, do you have a question for Leslie or something about mental health and basic income?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for letting me speak. I don't want to take too much of your time, but what you're talking about inspired me a little, because I used to be unemployed, and I thought I might add a little bit of perspective to that if you are interested in that.
Yeah, please.
So this whole UBI thing, and I'm following your work for a while, it can be argued from many different places, right? In the past, I used to argue a lot from the taxation base and that we kind of are owed it. But these days, I see it very differently, right? We are in a transitional phase where a lot of people are just living in constant fear. We have things like pandemic, where the government tells to you, or you can't work for a few months, right? Or climate. Now you have to buy a new heater or something like that. You might not be able to use your car, or your whole industry disappears. And people live in constant fear. They cannot plan.
Mhm.
And I feel like in general, UBI is the safety net we need for that. And my short little story is I used to be unemployed like 7 years ago. And in Germany, it's pretty good, right? You get welfare, you get a lot. But the problem really that you have with that, in my opinion, is that the social net can become a net that you get caught in and you
Mhm.
can't get out again. Because then you have to apply for it. You basically have to beg for it. You start to feel like a second-grade citizen. And sometimes dealing with the government agencies, they even treat you like that. People like screamed at me for no reason because they felt like they can do that because they had a bad day. And I'm just an
Mhm.
unemployed person, so they can talk to me like that, right? And also, my last thing here is that with new technologies, because governments kind of expect us all, like in the pandemic, to sit at home and build your own business at a PC or something, right? And I would even say, okay, I'm good with that if I have a safety net, right? Because if I'm unemployed in Germany right now, I'm not even allowed to.
Do we lose you?
Whoops. So one of the things what Alex was talking about made me think about is, especially when I was working at the battered women's shelter, but not just there. Part of what I had to help people do was navigate what we call a safety net, so that they could get on their feet outside of the context of an abusive relationship. But we have organized it such that it is not possible to move from the space where you're receiving benefits to a space where you are self-supporting. Because if on one end, let's say you get rental assistance or subsidized housing, you get food stamps, you get maybe childcare assistance, you get transportation assistance. As soon as you get employed, you're going to wage yourself out of childcare. For example, that's one of the first ones that people lose. Well, I could spend more than my mortgage on childcare. So if they lose that, then then now where are you going to keep the kids while you're able to keep your job? So we've made the gulf between getting in the US between getting help, getting support from the system, and being able to be self-sufficient. We've made that gulf so big that it's not actually possible to cross that divide. So you're right. I agree with you, Alex.
I want to add too, because Alex really mentioned what like the negative experiences of going through a conditional system, and it reminds me of another piece of evidence that is listed in my thread of evidence that people can find in the reply to this space, which was a meta-analysis of studies done globally on the mental health impacts of cash transfers on kids up to age 19, found an overall positive effect on mental health, with the caveat that making cash conditional versus unconditional can have negative impacts, especially on girls. So this conditionality of this system that we currently have can definitely actually worsen mental health instead of improving it, and it can really just come down to conditionality versus unconditionality. And I'd also want to mention too, since Alex mentioned about automation, that there's been studies that show that even just this anxiety of feeling that you're going to potentially lose your job can have negative mental health impacts too. So as automation improves and as AI gets better, then part of the discussion isn't only about, oh, are going to people be out of jobs and are we going to make enough new jobs? It's this anxiety, this general stress and fear that comes from, am I next? Am I going to lose my job next? Am I going to be negatively impacted next? And that can have impacts right now, not in the future, but it can actually negatively impact people right now.
Right, and that's one of the ongoing impact of the increasing inequality is we see that our being able to make it, it's just receding into the sunset or whatever. It's receding away from us.
Can I ask you?
I think this is a really important thing to if people are going out and talking about basic income to people, a lot of people will say, "Oh, it doesn't work because look at how unemployment worked in the pandemic, or look at welfare, and welfare has never worked, or whatever." I think it's rather than arguing like the subtle differences. I think that's just that's misunderstanding UBI to begin with. Is giving that ground. I generally come back that if you're comparing UBI to welfare as we have it, or unemployment insurance as we have it, then you're not understanding the mechanism or the psychology resultant of it. Because to me, basic income is fundamentally the opposite of welfare as we know it. It's not like an upgrade to it. It is the opposite of how we're doing it, where as opposed to a ceiling, it's a floor. And it's a very important distinction to make, that one punishes you for working, for pushing forward, for planning, and the other does not. It supports you to do any of those things to the degree that you want. So engaging in that argument from the first place and giving up the ghost on the idea that this is just like welfare, it's very important to make that clear. This is the opposite of welfare. It's not better welfare. It's better social support.
And the other thing that when I talk to my friends on the right, one of the things that I talk about is how do you want the money to be used? Like right now, a lot of what we call a safety net or welfare or those things, we're using a lot of that money on really slow, really clunky, really ineffective infrastructure and all kind of things to trickle a little bit out the back towards the people that we've decided deserve and need it. But actually, folks are much more efficient at using that money in however they need to, and then we're not running them through these other hoops. I remember when I was much more active in helping people access these systems such as they are, like I remember thinking, okay, I live in a house, there's another income earner in my house, we're doing okay. I would lose my mind if I had to keep track of the receipts and the brands and the whatever that my clients, who are also dealing with court involvement because of domestic violence and being a single parent and all these other things, it's impossible for them to jump through the hoops in the right order and with the right look on their face to make what limited access is available possible. It's nuts.
Yeah. Yep. John, did you have a question now related to mental health for Leslie?
Yeah, I think so. But I'll just say that I think what the last speaker was talking about, it sounds like it's more like you could use the phrase, it's an investment in people. And the way that sounds is much more positive on a mental health level than welfare, perhaps, because of the way it's framed negatively. And given that there is a discussion of tech, AI, this idea that like people are still worth investing in would address that kind of anxiety. And I really think that on financial discussions, talking about investment, and it's like long term, it's like it'll pay off in the long run. And anytime we talk in business, there's short term business, there's long term business, and often people say long term wins. But in terms of, I guess I'll frame the mental health thing on homelessness. So my question is, because I'm in Canada as well, and there were programs to kind of provide people, once they had experienced homelessness, provide people a living space, and that didn't really work out. And then you compare Finland, where it was seen as something that must be prevented. Absolutely, like the moment that risk is there, to provide a place to live, and it was generally successful because once someone experiences homelessness for too long, it's something that's sort of potentially not reversible. So my question is, does UBI, is it showing that that is something that is able to help people get out of homelessness? Like if that's being studied or if that's already...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, sure.
Go, Scott. You take it first.
Oh, yeah. So we actually just covered this in our previous space. So you might want to go to the Comingle channel on YouTube and check out our conversation with Mark Donovan last week, who's actually been running the Denver Basic Income program that's focused on homelessness. And he had a lot to share, and the preliminary results of that are actually coming out soon. So keep an eye on that. But part of his discussion was he was inspired by the Vancouver LEAF program, which actually provided unconditional cash to the homeless, and discovered that providing $7,500 without conditions actually saved $8,100 in the shelter system. So, like you said, this is return on investment. It was cheaper to actually just make sure that people had money, and we just see that just regularly, that we know that there is definitely some percentage of the population of the homeless who simply just need money. And another study showed that you could actually, gosh, I don't remember the exact numbers. I think it was that if the just $1,000 provided to someone who is on the edge of homelessness could actually prevent homelessness for a very large percentage of them. I don't remember the percentage. I think it was somewhere around a half, I think. But it was incredibly effective in actual homelessness prevention. So it's not only most effective to make sure people have cash without strings to make their own decisions and no longer be homeless, but also you can prevent so much homelessness by just making sure that people have the stability that they can always count on, because all it can take is just falling short 1 month and you can end up homeless just from a series of events that leads from that.
Yeah, I think it's important in strategizing around it too, is to acknowledge two things. There's two aspects to mitigating homelessness. Is one, there's a great deal of people, as Scott's talking about, who can get out of their own bind if they have a little agency, right? And then there's also people will bring up people who are addicted, and whether or not they were addicted and became homeless, or vice versa, or people who, there are plenty of people who are in a situation that's going to take some time to come out of, that might be hard to recover from. And that shouldn't be seen as a reason like why those people shouldn't get a basic income and they need other services. To me, it's much more effective for whatever other wraparound services people need to provide those services for people who have some sort of income with which to participate, with which to do what they can for themselves, rather than trying to say, okay, you're a person who is incapable of functioning and we have to do everything for you. No, everyone knows to the extent, or essentially everyone knows to the extent necessary to spend a basic income wisely at the sizes proposed, that getting help to anyone in a situation, be it addiction or whatever, is easier if they have a basic income, even if they weren't able to get themselves off the street entirely alone. It makes all of the other programs we want to provide for people it puts a lot less burden on them to just do everything to solve someone's problem, and they can be more strategic in their approach.
The other thing is, by unhooking those two things, by saying, we care about you, we want you to be okay, here is a basic income, and there are these other services. If you want to access them, we would love to give you a hand, but we don't hook. If you don't access these services, you don't get this income. It makes it much more likely that they will, decide to access the services, but also actually the services will be more effective because it was elective. I mean, it's a little bit like, books that I had to read in high school that I would rather rip my arm off and beat myself with it than read the stupid book. that I've read as an adult. I was like, dang, that's a good book. I should have read that then. But because it was crammed down my throat and tied to something that I wanted, it felt coerced, and I actually wasn't going to get much out of it. If I say to you, I'm willing to give you this basic income, but you have to go into rehab first, and then you'll have to take drug tests, and you'll have to prove that you have a job, then I'm not going to bother.
Yeah. And just like the housing first conversation, there's an order of operations issue. Like the financial literacy tests are in classes and things that everyone advocates. We just need people to understand money better. It's so absurd to me to have someone sitting in a classroom watching the clock for when they have to get back to the shelter, hungry belly, like trying to take notes on what they're going to do with money if should they ever have it, rather than get people money first. And part of the financial literacy comes through practice, and the other part of it comes with just knowing you're okay enough to take the class. When we ran a pilot for this series, one of the things that kind of surprised me how quickly it happened was just how immediately interested in people's finances they became. Like people who were sort of ignoring sort of the mounting debts and things like that because they didn't know how to deal with it, started learning how to do spreadsheets and looking up apps, and it was just immediately they felt like they had an avenue in, and so they pursued it themselves. They didn't have to be told to.
Yeah, I also just want to add to that. Like, I think it's so important. The universality of basic income is so important to making sure that there are all these people out there with just essentially money problems, that those can lead to homelessness, those can lead to mental health issues, like those can lead to so many of these problems. And if we just make sure that everyone has a basic income, then we know for sure that those are the ones who aren't still out there. And so, like, you can imagine after basic income is implemented, there's still going to be people with mental health issues and people committing crimes and people who are homeless. There's going to be a lot fewer of them, but the ones that we still see, it's going to be so much easier to actually help them with what they need beyond the basic income because they're actually so much more clearly visible.
Right. The other thing is, it is, I don't know, laughable is not really strong enough to suggest that people who are poor don't understand how finances work and don't spend money well. I mean, part of it is a basic math issue. If you only have X amount of money, and out of that you have to get rent and food and school supplies and whatever the things are, like people figure that out in a way that I suspect many high-flying financial advisors would. Okay, let's give you what some of these people have for income, or what we call a safety net. You figure out how to make bills for a month. So just that little thing.
Yeah. Kylea, do you have a question for Leslie, or about a comment about mental health and basic income?
Yeah, so it's not so much a question. For those of you that do not know me, I'm involved with 2 nonprofit organizations. I've also been a certified peer support worker, and I work with people that are experiencing sex crimes, usually on the street. They're, partaking in the sex trade and experiencing trafficking. What we see a lot of times is many of them have not completed high school. And, for them to deal with all of the paperwork involved and just getting general welfare, it's very difficult. Like, a lot of them do not have a place that they're regularly receiving their mail. If they get it sent to us, then we have to try and track them down to get their mail to them. It's not necessarily always getting there in time. And then, they don't always have the ability to fill all of that out. Like, they can't just go to the library. Like, a lot of people think, oh, just go to the library and fill it out there. But the thing is, because they're experiencing so much theft, they often have lost their ID, lost their library card. Like, they don't have access to any of that. And just trying to get to the Human Services Department is a challenge for them when they have absolutely no money. And so that's just all the anxiety that plays into this. It's the stress and anxiety, and then they can't get to doing what they need to do.
Yeah, that's a really good point to make, Kylea.
Yeah, it becomes a compounding thing where one aspect of poverty losing your home or losing your job just opens the door for many of the other negative ramifications of being poor just to sweep on in.
Exactly. Yeah. And I mean, you guys were talking earlier about how that sleep deprivation affects things, and there's glutamate that builds up in the brain when people aren't getting enough sleep, and it can actually cause them insomnia. So it's like this continuous cycle that they're in of they can't make good decisions because the glutamate's built up, and at the same time they can't sleep because the glutamate's built up. So yeah, we just need to get people to where they have like the essential floor that we're all talking about, and also just having the ability to have someplace safe to sleep.
Yeah. I guess I just want to add, so we've got about 4 minutes left, and do we want to do just a bit of a roundup? Is there, do you want to just, Josh or Conrad, do you want to do an update on Comingle?
Yeah, I had a couple of things. So we got a lot of people in the room. Let's talk about the crowdfund we're doing. Let's talk about Comingle a little more. For those who weren't here, it's basically UBI in an app. It's a way to pool money across people really, really efficiently so that everyone in the community never experiences a week without income. It's sort of a solidarity model. We're doing a crowdfund for it right now on Indiegogo. The link is in Scott's reply in the tweet thread. We're at 96%, 72,000 out of the 75,000 that we need, and we have 7 days left, and we're hoping to shoot through that goal soon. And we have a matching backer, so that the next time we hit, when we hit 73,000, he'll bump it to 74,000, and then we're hop, skip, and a jump away. So those are the numbers, and I just wanted to make a point in the context of today that essentially what we're building is it's not just a place for the movement to go and grow, and it's the first permanent UBI essentially model that we're trying to build, because it's set up to function like a governmental model with its own taxation system. It's also the first support structure that works this way, that is permanent and scalable, that works like a UBI, and because it's connected to the internet and connected through bank accounts, and there's just mountains and mountains of data in terms of impact that are first order obvious that we should be able to take out of the growing community once we launch, like what's happening, how many people are paying their bills, and keeping up, how many people are pulled out of poverty, that sort of thing. But this conversation today reminded me too of another source of very valuable data, which comes in the form of stories and personal answers, where if we have all these people connected in an app and a certain number of people willing to take quarterly surveys and things like that, I'm very curious to see what $50 a week, $200 a month means to all the people who choose to fill out that impact data and take those surveys, and in a way that we can measure at scale, and learn as we go what kinds of questions to ask, like how has this affected your relationships? How has this affected your self-esteem? How has this affected the way you think about things and the way you present in the world? And I just feel like there's so much we can learn there, that I'm excited about those, I think, even more than the numerical data. So yeah, I would encourage everyone on here. We're focusing more on people than numbers than money now. Put $1 in if that's all you got, or tell your friends and share. Help us build this community around Comingle as we're developing it, so that when we launch, we can launch with a lot of people trying it out and a lot of data to share with the world quickly.
And I like to think of it as a mental health app. It's better than your BetterHelp or something like that. It's like, because we're addressing the actual core issues that are causing so many mental health problems. So if that helps you to put the word out about it, yes, it's going to make us less insane. How about that?
And this space that we've been having, this discussion, will be available also in the Comingle YouTube channel soon after. this ends. So it might also be something you'd like to share. And again, check out the previous spaces that are also there. And Leslie, as our special guest today, thank you for joining us. Do you have anything you'd like to end with?
Oh, it was my absolute pleasure to be here. I am hopeful that, I have this stamp on my butt that says I'm a licensed counselor. So this has sort of been one of the angles that I've been taken with people. If we can get a universal basic income, we will take a dramatic bite out of mental illness and even physical illness. So sometimes that's been an argument that has worked for a variety of people that might not just out of the gate be for a basic income. Thanks for having me. This has been a blast.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks for coming. This was great.
Yeah, that was a great ending note. Thank you so much for joining us today, Leslie. And thank you, everyone here, for joining us today. And for those who stepped up to ask questions and give comments, thank you as well. And please consider supporting Comingle. And we'll have another space sometime next week. And let's make it happen. And hopefully we can get a small basic income going at least soon together, instead of waiting for government to eventually get around to it, which hopefully they eventually will.
Eventually. Thanks, Scott. This is great. Thank you.